Hello everyone, and thank you guys for joining this live stream. I'm Kevin Ruess here at Interview Victory, and I'm happy to be here and happy to be doing my first live stream. This will be exciting for me. I've done live streams before for other projects. And for many years, so this is not new to me, the live stream concept. But just for this for this channel, Interview Victory, this will be my first one. So I'm excited to be here and excited to chat about whatever comes up for people. This is mostly designed for folks who have upcoming interviews, and those being job interviews, academic program interviews, anything in that arena. And so I thought we would just start doing these, going to try to do them on a weekly basis and make them as consistent as I can for people to just kind of come in for office hours, that kind of thing. Ask any questions that are coming up and get some advice on it. So we did have, we did have some questions sent in. So there's a couple ways to send in questions. The easiest way will be to just comment on this video or on any of our videos on YouTube. We will check those. If you have the question, we'll make it into the live stream for the next time. So if you have a question that you do want asked next time and you're watching this live stream in the past, just put a comment below and I will review that and make sure to put in the next live stream. The other thing will be if you have, there's an Ask Kevin link on most of my videos. I don't think it's in this description in here, but I'll try to add it. But basically, you can show up at our website, interviewvictory.com, and there's a link, Ask Kevin. There's a form there. You can submit that form, and again, I'll add that to it. So a couple different ways to get this. For those of you who are joining me from some of our social media channels, welcome. Happy to have you, and thanks for following us. And same with our subscribers on YouTube. So let's just get into the questions. This shouldn't be a very long session because I got, just a number of questions I thought we'd go through, but I want to address them. And the first question comes from Dara, and she wrote, and these are questions that you're going to be getting on your interview. So let me just clarify that. So her question is, how should I respond in my interview when they ask, "Are you a perfectionist?" So I think this is a really interesting question because perfectionism can seem like a good thing. Most of us, when we talk about perfectionism in an interview, a lot of people use it as a strength. Actually, I've heard many candidates that I've worked with over the years, when they're asked the question, "What are your strengths and weaknesses?" one of the strengths that people often bring up is that they're a perfectionist. So yes, that can be a strength, but be careful of the downsides of perfectionism, which is, of course, that you can get carried away, right? You can be obsessive about things that don't matter. So there's an obsession about details that's usually positive. I think in certain industries, obsession over details can be extremely positive, and in other industries and other fields, other jobs, obsession over details can be a waste of time. So think about that in the context of what position you're applying to. If you're going in for an academic program, the difference between an academic program that is maybe medicine or project management, or not project management, but let's say business, MBA or something like that, where you'll be doing project management and a more managerial type role. It's hard to say, right? So medicine, you probably do want more perfectionism. You probably do want more attention to detail. So that could be a positive thing. I've done a lot of work with dentists over the years, as many of you know, and perfectionism in dentistry is excellent. It's mostly a great thing. On the other hand, perfectionism in marketing, probably not a great idea because there's so much to do. You're spending a lot of time doing experimentation and trial and error, and so perfectionism can be a big waste of time. So it really depends. Now, if you're talking about the airline industry, I used to work for Boeing at one time. We're talking about commercial jets or even military. jets, anything that flies, you want perfectionism in some ways. If we're talking about manufacturing, the closer you can get to perfectionism, the better. So I really would challenge you to ask yourself, what is my industry? What's the job I'm applying for? And is that going to sound good to them if I say I'm a perfectionist or not? And so in this response, again, Nadara, I don't know what the position that you're interviewing for is, but I might kind of acknowledge in my response that to a certain extent I am a perfectionist, but not when it starts to become a negative thing. So that's just a nice, easy way of giving them some confidence that you do have a lot of attention to detail. One could maybe attribute that as a perfectionist attitude, but the better thing to say is, I'm not a perfectionist in the sense that I don't obsess over details, but I do spend a lot of attention on what needs to be done. And like I said, many things in this world we're grateful for. I have a beautiful MacBook here, and there's a level of attention to detail and perfectionism that that the designers of an Apple and certain companies have that kind of perfectionist attitude, and that's actually a really positive thing. So we appreciate that in society, and so I don't want to make it into a negative necessarily all the time, but just be careful. Okay, great. And we have a question from Josh writing in, what is your biggest weakness? So this is a big one. And I say this a few times in some of my videos, but the weakness question, what is your biggest weakness? It's usually asked in combination with another question, which is what is your biggest strength, right? So you're going to usually get that around the same time as you get the question, what's your biggest weakness? Now, most of the time, what I find is that companies will ask, what's your biggest strength first, and then go to the what's your biggest weakness. Sometimes they'll just drop the strength and they'll ask this question directly, what's your biggest weakness? And the reason they ask it with the strength is to kind of, as I've said before, to butter you up a little bit, to make you feel more comfortable talking about your weakness. Now, they want a true weakness. And so this is a really important question. Thinking about what's your genuine weakness. Now, a lot of people will, interestingly, when I work with them, they will not even really look within to see what their real weakness is, because the assumption is, well, I can't tell them my real weakness. I mean, that's not going to fly. So let me think about what the best weakness I can fake and create is and make up. So the problem with that is that, it seems safe, but it doesn't answer the question. It's inauthentic. And if I'm a really good interviewer who's interviewed hundreds, if not thousands, of candidates over the years, I'll be able to pick up on the fact that this doesn't sound real or authentic, because I'm probably, if I'm a hiring manager who's interviewed thousands of candidates, I'm probably more aware of made up answers than you are, especially when it comes to your own made up answers. We're all kind of attached to our own stories. So in this case, it's likely that you're not going to fool them, especially if it's something, like a positive. A lot of people will try to use a positive attribute as a negative. I work too hard. I'm too dedicated. I care too much about people. This is nonsense. These are nonsense answers. These are strengths being passed as weaknesses. And that's not only not answering the real question, it's also annoying to interviewers, because they hear too much of that cliche crap. So you really want to be honest with yourself. And it's interesting. I've had a few candidates I've worked with who, I think they were so good at what they did, they were so talented, and in a state of they were kind of egoic, right? So they actually really did have trouble thinking, I don't know what my weakness is. I'm great at everything. So if you're not one of those people, hopefully you're not, then that's good, because I want you to kind of get in touch and ask yourself, what are some of the ways that I could improve? And that's another great way to think about this is, if I could change one thing about myself, what would that be? Especially when it came to work and productivity. What would make me a better employee? What would make me a better worker? What would make me a better whatever you are, teacher? What's one thing I would change about myself? And that's what I would start to look at in terms of my weakness. Now, for me, one of the things that I would like to get better at is consistency. So one of my weaknesses is that I'll start something like a habit every morning. Maybe I want to wake up and do a 10-minute meditation in the morning to start my day. I'm really gung-ho about that for a few weeks, and then things get busy, life happens, and suddenly I'm just, drink my coffee and let's get going. I'm already late, right? So one thing that I would say is my weakness in an interview would be like, I'm really great at coming up with great ideas and starting maybe to try to build a habit, but I'm not great at keeping that habit in place. And so one thing I want to get better at is when I start a positive habit or routine to kind of keep that in place. I'm not great at routine. So that's a big weakness of mine. And that weakness could affect, now I'm not going to say this part to the interview, but I'm just now saying you want to find a weakness that could in fact negatively affect your job performance. Now, why would you want to do that in your interview? Well, because it's acknowledging that you're a real person, and that you're, more importantly, that you're self-aware of your weaknesses, you're self-aware of your limitations. And if someone has no awareness of their limitations, well, they're very likely to have, there's probably a 99% chance they do have limitations and they do have weaknesses. But if they're not aware of those weaknesses, there's like also a 99% chance that they'll never be able to fix those or improve upon those, right? Because they're not aware, and what you're not aware of, you're not going to be able to improve. So you want to be sure that you're able to talk about weaknesses that you're aware of. So when you're giving that response, okay, here's my weakness, I'm not great at routines. The other thing I would mention at the end of that response is, or near the end, is here's a few ways I've tried to improve that. Here's a few ways that I have improved that. Back 5 years ago, I was terrible at routines. Surprisingly, I've now picked up a few good ones, and it was through hard work. It was through reading a book on habits. There's a couple of great books on that. And so you can talk about some of the techniques you've used and tricks you've used to improve yourself in terms of this weakness, and then you deliver that. Now, people who don't do that part at the end and don't include how they've improved at this weakness, I'd say they're missing half the points for this question. I would call it points, but there's not really points, but you're missing half the battle there. So you want to make sure your response has that two parts. The first, what is the weakness? And the second, how are you improving upon that weakness? Okay, great. So hopefully it answers your question. Let's go to Sasha's question. When do you think it is good to lie in an interview? Actually, her question actually is the question to her in an interview was, when do you think it's good to lie? So I was about to respond like, when is it good to lie in an interview? But that's actually a little more interesting, is when do you think someone in your interview, the interviewer, the hiring manager, the director, whatever, asking you, hey, when do you think it's a good idea to lie? Very tough question in an interview, right? So you need to figure out what they're trying to get at. So again, context is everything. I don't want to give a response to this. I don't want to give guidance to this as if it is a black or white thing. Now, it's tempting to think with lying that it's a black or white thing. Lying is bad, right? We were brought up to always know and believe that lying is a bad thing. You should never lie. That's what your parents told you, right? Well, okay, true. But depending on the person asking the question, they might have different values than your parents, right? So we just don't know. Now, let's take a quick example that's an interesting one, right? Let's say you're a lawyer, you're interviewing at a law firm, and you get this question: when is it right? When is it okay, or when is it good to lie? By whoever's going to be your hiring manager. Well, there's a few different legal reasons why you might have to lie. And maybe that's to protect your client or confidentiality. And not to say that, you might be in a situation where someone says, hey, did this happen? And you might say, well, I can't talk about that. Maybe you can talk about that sometimes. Maybe you're just not supposed to. So there's different reasons why you might have to lie in certain legal aspects. Can't think of tons of those examples, but there might be a few, right? The other thing would be an industry in which there is, I'm thinking stuff like Hollywood, right? Or some sort of sales or marketing kind of positions, not where you'd be lying, but maybe you'd be expected to stretch the truth. You think about an advertisement that says, we are the best product out there. We are the number one in this, or these kind of statements. While they're not particularly lies, they're not, number one in, toothbrushes, whatever. These are not lies, but they're certainly not the truth. I mean, if you look at whether that toothbrush is number one or is, number one rated by all dentists. Okay, well, that's sort of a, did you do some research? Was the research conducted well? Is it bogus research? There's a lot of stuff companies say that's pretty much bogus. And so if you're interviewing for a position in which you'd be expected to be part of that and kind of stretch the truth a lot, maybe this question is to ensure that you're somebody who's not uncomfortable with lying, right? So I also want to throw out there that there are examples out there in interviewing where somebody might be hoping you'll be a liar, or hoping that I shouldn't say hoping you'll be a liar, but they're hoping you'll be more flexible online. And then there's other industries where the interviewers, take a no-nonsense approach. There's no tolerance for lying. And maybe one's in medicine, right, where you need to be extremely ethical in terms of what you say and what you do. We talk about, again, we might go back to law. You might be in a state where, mostly, law, there's probably times where, if you think about the other aspects of law, enforcement, FBI, all that kind of stuff, there might be areas where being truthful is extremely important, especially to your superiors. And most hiring managers, most bosses, most companies want truth, want transparency, really important for them. So and then just kind of depending on the context of the position, context of the company, do you know much about the company? You're going to have a sense of what do they value about lying? Is this an industry where they're going to be expecting that or not? You think about engineering, right? Again, we look at the model of, if you're an engineer, an aeronautical engineer, and you lie about whether or not this report is accurate, whether or not these calculations have been verified and checked by multiple people, and you lie about that, and you're basically throw that airplane up in the air, and something's off in your design or engineering with that. Well, that could be people's lives. Think about the big scandal with Volkswagen, right, where they claimed that their cars were passing smog, and they built a lie into the computer system. The computer system was lying to the smog detectors, to the state and to the various state smog detectors in the U.S. to pass smog, and the computer itself was lying, or it was tweaking itself to pretend like it was always this way, but once it left the smog station, it would go back to normal. So very unethical, right? So we can think about how important lying can be detrimentally, and mostly in most cases, I'd say it's more of a problem to companies and most organizations, but there are certain cases where they might be evaluating to see how comfortable you are with lying or stretching the truth, like I say. So it's a hard one to answer. Sometimes it's a hard one to answer. In most cases, you're just going to say, I don't believe you should lie. I believe the truth should be said. And I'd say 70 to 80% of the responses out there are going to need to be in that tone. Lying is bad. Don't lie. All that kind of stuff. Now, when you have someone that's maybe, again, we talk about the marketing kind of thing, you're not going to want to say, oh, it's okay to lie sometimes. I think what's always good to say is it's never a good idea to lie. There may be times where we need to stretch the truth. Again, if we're putting out a marketing campaign, and we might have to say something that, that isn't absolutely based on tons and tons of research, but we want to do our best to always bring the truth as much as we can. So that's giving them, that person who's, again, it's sort of like an unwritten rule. They're trying to evaluate whether you're comfortable stretching the truth, and you can kind of hint that you are, but officially say, no, but I think it's always bad to lie. So either way, you're always going to say it's bad to lie. And the truth is, I hope it always is bad to lie in your world. That's something that I value is honesty and transparency. And I think in general, that is the best route. So let's move on to another question. Nina, she sent in a question that you might get in your interview if you were to get, how do you want me to remember you? Now, this is similar to a question that's often asked. Why should we choose you, right? Why should we select you? There's a lot of great candidates say, why should we select you? This is a kind of an alternate take on that. How do you want me to remember you? And this is nice because it allows the candidate to present one or two interesting things about them in terms of the context of the role, the position, career, whatever, that they can take away and have like a little point or two. So you want to make sure you have something memorable for this. If you've done anything that worthy of, you've had a big accomplishment in your past, maybe you succeeded at a big difficult project, maybe you were the go-to person in your company for a very complex or difficult problem that was solved, or system. Like let's say I were an Oracle database person and this is an IT kind of example, but let's say I was an Oracle database expert in a team that, maybe they had a little bit of information about Oracle, but not very much. What I would say is something like, I'm the guy you can always go to ensure that your Oracle system is functioning the best. And I'm that go-to guy that can write any kind of SQL, Oracle database scripts and stuff like that. Whatever your thing is, whatever your kind of talent is, try to bring that in. I'm the person that was able to, virtualize 30, a lot of my examples are IT, virtualize 30 servers within the course of 2 months or something like that. Stuff like that shows that you've really been through a lot, that you've done some impressive things. Those are going to be really powerful and helpful. You could also throw in, it's possible you could throw in like a personal thing too as a side, but I wouldn't rely on that. There's some kids I've talked to that they're like a poet, right? They write poetry, they speak poetry in kind of like live poetry slams and stuff like that. This is not necessarily what you want to lead with, but you can just say, I'm an expert at this, and don't forget that I'm a poet. So remember that poet who's really good at, XYZ, project management. That's kind of a neat combo because you can mix in that personal side that's kind of interesting and quirky with the professional side, which is pretty vanilla, pretty boring, pretty bland, right? So you're interviewing for a job, maybe it's engineering. You're excellent at, the latest version of AutoCAD. I don't know. You're better than anybody else in your, at your previous positions. It back and forth. Okay, great. But how much better? I mean, how much are they going to remember you? But also, you like to do, I don't know, like derby car racing or something like that. That's kind of your side passion. Well, then you're combining those two, and you're allowing the unique, personal, quirky hobby that you have to stick to the more bland, professional characteristic. And now you have kind of an interesting combo that's unique, that sticks in the brain of the interviewer. And that's really what I want you to get to, is how can I be remembered as more interesting than my competitors? So if everybody who you're competing with has a similar background, similar education, similar experience in years, you can assume that they often do. What do you have personally that can help to make you more memorable? One great example of a candidate that I worked with a while ago was that he did, again, some sort of competition. I love this example because he did sort of like a competition that was moving big boulders around and chopping. I think it was like an old Scottish tradition of like grabbing boulders and throwing them and stuff, and who could throw the farthest. Some of you probably know more about that than I do, but that was something that he had that was unique, that he would bring into his interviews, and people would laugh and be interested. Oh, that's so funny. I've never heard of that. or they'd be like, "Whoa, that's really interesting. Tell me more about that." And that really flavored his professional qualifications and accomplishments because he had this personal side. It makes you more human as well. All right, and we are almost out of time. We are nearing up on the last question here. I'm going to ask that. Um, Sava asks, she wrote in like, what if you get the question, what is your nationality? Okay, so this is a important question for her to ask because a couple things. Number one, they shouldn't be asking this question during your interview. You should never, I'll say in most places in the world, you should never get this question. Now, I say that because number one, there are laws against it in certain countries. Like here in the US, there's a law against asking about nationality, creed, religion, um, race, and other aspects about family, such as if you have children, are you married, that kind of stuff, sexual orientation. So those are there's protected laws about that in certain countries, many places. But also it's just an aspect of ethics. Even if you're in a country where that's technically allowed to be asked during an interview, it's still unethical. And so if interviewers are asking about that, shame on them. What's your nationality? Now, there may be certain contexts in which it's just okay, and so that's something to think about. I don't know. I'm not going to say shame on everybody because, even though I don't love the question, I think it sort of detracts from finding the best candidate. Certain places that may be the thing that they do, and maybe they have their reasons. That said, if you are asked this question, even in a place where it's not allowed or not appropriate to ask it, what do you do as the interviewee? Well, there's a few things you shouldn't do if you want the job. First of all, that's the first question. Do you want this job? Now that they've asked you this question, what's your nationality? Do you want to work or be a part of this organization? And that's an important question because it will affect how you go about responding. If you have decided, well, you know what, the kind of people that would ask this question don't deserve what I have to offer, that shows me that they're not professional, shows me that they care about the wrong things. So, you know what, screw them. Then in that case, you can kind of say whatever you want. And that could include saying something like, that's not an appropriate question, or I don't really want to answer that. I'm not comfortable answering that. That would be the most polite way of doing that. Now, by saying that, that's not something I want to answer, I'm not comfortable with that question, you have probably now written off your likelihood of being hired or accepted. So I just want to put that out there, that being honest about that and saying, I don't want to answer that question, it angers the interviewers because they are feeling like, what? Who are you to, you're the one, I'm the one with the leverage, I'm the one with the power, you're being interviewed here. What do you mean you don't want to answer this question? What business of that is yours? Your job is to answer the question. So it's going to rub them the wrong way. They're going to be offended. They're going to be embarrassed a little bit, like, oh, you're schooling me on what is appropriate and what's not. So that embarrassment will come up for them, and then also anger and defensiveness and self-righteousness. So all these emotions will come up, negative emotions. And as we've talked about before, whenever there's a negative emotion with your interviewer or interviewers, whenever they feel negative emotions in your interview and it's related to you, they're likely not going to choose you. They're likely not going to select you and not like you. So that's why I say it's important to ask yourself, if you get a question like this, are you okay with that, or are you not okay? Like if I get a question like this, am I okay working for them still? Do I want to work here? If you do want to work here, then like I said, responding with something that says, no, I don't want to respond to that question is likely going to get you X'd off, right? So it's important to first ask that of yourself. And then if you do want the job still, and you don't care that they asked this question, you don't care that they were inappropriately asking this question, then what can you say? Well, one is the truth. You could just tell them, well, I am of this. I guess that's really what I would say. I mean, I'm trying to think of what else you could say to a question of nationality. I guess you could lie. It's like the previous question, when is it okay to lie? Well, it's none of their business what your nationality is. So whatever you need to say, if you know that saying a certain nationality would either get you in trouble, I shouldn't say in trouble, but they wouldn't like it, or they would like it, well, then you make up your mind about that and you decide, well, maybe I just tell them what they want to hear, play the game. And a lot of people, most people are not they might have guesses about nationality, but they're not really experts in any of that. So you might tell them what you want to hear if you want the job. Again, I'd be very questionable about a person asking this question, and I would probably think, well, I'm not interested in this position anymore because you shouldn't be asking questions like that. But that said, there are certain reasons why maybe you need the job. Maybe it's just a matter of like, hey, this is all I got. I'm in a situation where this is the best opportunity I'm going to get. And so you might tell them just what you want to do. So in that case, I would say lying is okay because, again, they're unethical for asking the question, so they don't deserve the absolute truth. The other way is just to tell them the truth and just say, oh, screw it. Here I am. Here's what it is. And especially if you don't think it'll harm your chances, the transparency the openness about that, telling them what they want to hear will probably be appreciated, and they can move on to the next question. Either way, I wouldn't stay on it too long. I wouldn't explain it. Let's say someone asked me what my nationality is. In this case, I'm an American, so I would just say, well, I'm an American, and I would move on to the next question. I wouldn't say, well, I wouldn't try to defend it. I wouldn't try to explain that, or unless they asked more questions about that. So that's how I would answer that question. Hopefully you don't get that question in your interview, though, and my hope is that nobody does, but I know it happens. So. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me in this session today. I really appreciate those of you who came out and those of you who are watching later on. And if you do have any questions you'd like me to answer in the next one, just put a comment below. And also make sure, if you're not a subscriber already, to click on the subscribe button down below the video, and click on the bell ring the bell to make sure that you are notified when we put out a new one. Just because, even if I send you an email about it or so, or if you're on our list, or if you get that notification, it may not pop up for you and you may miss it. So make sure to get that by subscribing on that button and clicking the bell. Alrighty, have a wonderful week, everybody, and thanks for joining, and we'll see you next time. Thanks.